Okay, thank you. So listen, first of all, just a little bit about O'Regan Advisors and what we do. This is like a summary of the work we do in the area of parking and mobility. One of our specialisms is parking consultancy for public sector organisations. I've worked in that area myself for many years, and we help local authorities to design and digitalise and improve the customer experience of their parking and mobility services. And alongside that, we also support local authorities with, benchmarking market best practices, with tenders for the services that they need, and with the challenging process, which I know you all know a lot about, of operationalizing your sustainable mobility strategies. As you're probably all aware, this is the latest in a series of webinars that we've been running that are connected with the areas I spoke about on the previous slide. And, in previous sessions, we've talked about things like, making the right decisions when you're choosing parking equipment or software solutions, how to plan and execute changes to bylaws, because that's sometimes a challenge for local authorities like yourselves. And we've also spoken at length about what's going on in the wider context. We've had contributors at previous sessions from some of John's colleagues at the Department of Transport, for example, about what's coming down the line in areas like demand management and how those changes are going to affect the parking and mobility world. So today's theme, of course, is about communication. We chose this theme based on feedback from previous sessions. You'll all be pleased to know you'll get a post-webinar email from us, but we like to find out what was useful and what areas you'd like to hear about in future sessions. And that theme was, it came up in previous sessions because I think, as you're all aware, communication really is a key pillar in, developing strategy and operationalizing strategy. It actually often comes up as, a potential roadblock, to certain changes. People can be reluctant to push through things, maybe because of the perceptions that might be associated with it and so on. So we wanted to touch on that today. Look, I know everybody here is very acutely aware of the importance of trust with your public as you seek to develop and implement changes locally. And to build that trust, it's really key that you communicate what you're doing and you gather input from your communities and your stakeholders as you're going along. And those three elements here, play a really, vital part in building any local mobility and parking strategy and in putting that strategy into operation. And as I'm sure you all know, if you get the communication bit right, it plays a huge part in delivering a service that is supported by your public stakeholders and that is successful. And of course, conversely, if you don't get it right, it's likely that the changes you make won't be supported and won't be successful. So that really brings me on to John, who I'm delighted to welcome today. John is Principal Officer at the Department of Transport with responsibility for climate action, governance and engagement. John was centrally involved in the transport aspects of developing the Climate Action Plan. I'm sure you probably have lots of questions to ask him today on that. And John will give us some insights into the work that the department is doing, to engage with local authorities and other stakeholders and communities indeed as well about, the kind of key drivers and aims of the CAP23, as we call it for short. So John, I'll hand over to yourself.
Thanks a million, Alan. I'll just get my presentation up here and you might give me a shout to confirm you can see it.
That's all good.
So to move that. Move the dialog screen here for a second.
Yep.
Okay, all good?
All good, John, yeah.
Excellent. Thanks a million for the introduction, Alan. So John Martin is my name, Department of Transport. So the first thing we're going to talk about, I'm going to move this dialog screen off there if I can. The first thing we need to talk about when we're talking about communications in the context of CAP23 is what is it we're trying to communicate? And anyone who's familiar with CAP23 will know that we've set some very high-level matrices of things we're looking to achieve both by 2025 and 2030. So table 15.6 of the Climate Action Plan sets those out, and that's shown there. But to just show you in detail, just on the screen, we're looking at a 20% reduction in the vehicle kilometers driven by 2030, okay? So that means that's compared to business as usual. So we will have demographic growth. We accept that we will have demographic growth. So what we've said is the predictions under the business as usual, we want to cut that back by 20%. So it's not 20% of what we have now or what we had in 2018, but it's 20% of what we would otherwise have had in 2030. So essentially, being very simplistic about it, that means everybody driving a fifth less than they're currently driving. A second metric there is that we want to increase the modal share of sustainable modes up to about 1 in 2. So 50% of journeys taken every day should be either by public transport or by active travel. Currently, cars account for just under 3/4 of our journeys. So we're looking to reduce the number of journeys taken by car and increase the number of journeys taken either by public transport or by active travel. The third metric focuses specifically on how we get our kids to school, because this is a significant contributor to car journeys and car journeys driven or car kilometers driven and hence emissions. But it's also about setting a culture, setting a new normal. And if we can get our kids used to walking or cycling or taking public transport to school again, accompanied or unaccompanied, that creates a culture that they'll take with them later into life. And that's really important. The census results this year have showed that we've almost doubled the number of kids who are cycling or walking to school compared to 2016. So we're already moving in the right direction, but we've more to go. The fourth metric there is that 30% of our car fleet will be made up of EVs by 2030. That's about 900,000 EVs on the road by 2030. And the fifth one is increasing the ratio of biofuels that we have in our diesel and petrol at the pumps, so that we have up to 10% ethanol in our petrol and up to 20% biodiesel in our diesel. Now, what you'll notice there's 5 metrics I have on the screen there. 4 out of the 5 of them rely on individual behavior change. So not only what the government is doing, but also how people go about their day-to-day business. And therefore, it's obvious to say that achieving a modal shift to transport modes that have lower or zero carbon emissions, including active travel and public transport, will require significant public buy-in. This isn't like the electricity generation sector, for example, where people will still turn on and off their switches, but how that electricity is generated at an industrial level is changed. This is all about how people go about their day-to-day lives, how they travel, how they choose to get from A to B. So there is a strong element of public buy-in and behavioral change. And that's why engagement and communications here are so important. I just want to reflect for a couple of seconds on a report that the OECD did on behalf of the Climate Change Advisory Council last year called Redesigning Ireland's Transport for Net Zero. And they identified communication efforts as among the 3 policies that have the highest potential to reverse car dependency and reduce emissions via a just transition. So they said, whatever else you do, EV policies, all these other things, getting your communications right is one of the top 3 things you can do to deliver your cut in emissions in the transport sector. And if we scale up good communication efforts, they can transform the system structure to change patterns of behavior. And to give you an example of the sort of theory behind this, they're talking about investment in communication promoting sustainable systems can increase public pressure for public transport and active modes, thus accelerating a virtuous cycle. So if you look at these 4 boxes here, as public pressure to enhance sustainable modes increases, things like road space reallocation become more feasible and can be accelerated. And therefore, you decrease the road capacity for cars and further liberate space for public transport and active modes, thereby increasing the attractiveness of sustainable modes and the pressure to improve them further. And that becomes a cycle. So if you start that cycle rolling, it becomes ever more perpetuated. So we've got to get into that systemic cycle of creating a communications environment where people want better public transport and want better sustainable modes, and then it becomes a cycle. So the OECD did very much point to the fact that scaling up of communication efforts is needed to build political support for the policies outlined in their report. And they spoke about two things that were needed: a whole government communication strategy to reverse car culture and demonstrate the well-being benefits of car-independent transport systems. Now, we are never in Ireland going to have a car-independent transport system, but we do need to strive for reduced car usage. We also need to look at how we advertise cars, because they disturb that system, they disturb that cycle, which means that people are bought into the fact that having a car is great. You're driving around empty streets or off-road or whatever the ads show you, and they create an attractiveness, and we've got to try and challenge that. So as a result of all these things telling us that we need to improve our communications, the Climate Action Plan and the Sustainable Mobility Strategy both point to a need to raise awareness about the systemic changes that are already taking place in public transport and active travel, and to encourage behavioral change where possible. So CAP23 says that we need a strategy that will clearly communicate government measures and policies to support the changes needed to transform the transport system, as well as motivating individuals to make a shift in how they travel. So there's two parts to that: communicating the alternatives, making people aware of what else there is other than just relying on your car, and then trying to persuade them to use them. And again, it's a cyclical thing. The more people who get out of their cars and choose to walk or cycle or use public transport, the less cars there are on the road, the less congestion there is, the safer and more efficient active travel and public transport become. And again, you're into this cyclical thing. So what we have to do is to break the current patterns and create that new cycle of public transport and active travel being the preferred mode, because they work. And the more they work, the more people will move into them, the better they'll work, if that makes sense. So just in terms of why communications are really important in the context of the Climate Action Plan. So the transport chapter of the Climate Action Plan has 15 key work programs. You don't need to look through them all here. They all rely on a degree of engagement. They all rely on a degree of consultation, but some of them in particular heavily rely on public buy-in, on behavioral change, on public acceptance. And they're the ones that we really need to focus on here. So I've called them out here: demand management, which is about reducing the relative attractiveness of car use versus other modes. So if car use is made maybe less attractive in some ways and other modes are made more attractive, you reduce the demand for people wanting to use their cars. Road space reallocation, moving spaces from car parking and moving spaces from carriageway over to other uses. Active travel, cycleways, wider pavements, improved public realm, shared, smart and integrated mobility, people using bike shares and car shares, and then electric vehicle charging infrastructure and electric vehicle uptake. These are all things that we rely on the public to do their bit, as well as government and local authorities delivering their bit. And that's why it's so important that we get the communications in these areas absolutely right. So just to touch very quickly on what the Department of Transport is doing, we have an overall communications and engagement strategy, which is currently in development and about to roll out. And there are 4 key pillars or 4 key work streams here. One is around public engagement generally, and this is nationally rolled out public engagement. It's not necessarily targeted at certain areas or certain projects. It's a national campaign to show very clearly what we're trying to do with the Climate Action Plan, to show very clearly how we can reduce car dependency and improve other modes of travel. So that will include a national ad campaign. I'll say more about that in the next slide. Stakeholder engagement, and then community and citizen engagement. So that's targeting everybody across the whole community. The second is local authority communications, engagement, and in particular, project acceptance support. Again, I'll come into each of these in a bit more detail in a minute, but the key thing here is that we need our active travel projects and our public transport projects to proceed. And therefore, communications are key in terms of getting the support for those and allowing those projects to proceed. And we need a specific and bespoke program of work to support the communications around those individual projects. The third, as I mentioned already, is looking at the role that car advertising plays in the culture of car dependency in Ireland. And the fourth is evaluating how all this is happening and improve it over time to make sure we're getting the right messages and they're landing correctly. So to touch very quickly on the first work stream, which is, as I said, has an ad campaign, stakeholder engagement, and community engagement. We are in the process of developing an ad campaign. I don't have any content or copy to show you because it's being developed, but it is very much a campaign that looks at presenting the vision of the alternative to using cars. So bike it, walk it, bus it, or train it. So it's very much focusing on each individual journey and the fact that each journey counts. Your journey counts, and every decision you make around every journey has a difference. So that we're looking at launching that campaign later on this summer, and that will very much present that high-level vision and create a whole sort of brand around alternative forms of transport that we can build on then into the future. Then in terms of stakeholder engagement, the department and the NTA are engaging directly with a whole range of stakeholders who influence transport policy and those who are responsible for or who support the delivery of items under the Climate Action Plan. So this is all about inspiring, ensuring alignment on levels of ambition required, and increasing the knowledge of the key deliverables and the relationships between them. So this is about engaging with people like yourselves, local authority executives, Pathfinder project owners, the political system, business groups, the health sector, the education sector, academia, and speaking at a whole range of technical conferences, working groups, etc. So that we're really getting the message out across those stakeholders who have a role and can influence transport policy and influence decisions on the ground. So that is a core piece of the work. And then the other piece of work, and I think this is where local authorities have a really, really strong and positive role to play, is community and citizen engagement. So it's about engaging with those stakeholders that influence delivery of citizen-facing communications and engagement. PPNs, local authority groups, the CAROs, there's a whole range of different organizations who have a direct interface with communities and people on the ground. And we need to engage with them so that they can further promote and prompt and nudge these messages. And it's about embedding and improving sustainable transport messages into existing campaigns, be they educational campaigns, health campaigns. There's a whole range of things where there are co-benefits between transport emissions and other things like health. Active travel obviously has a huge benefit on health, business and commerce. You know, if you have less congestion in cities, you have increased commerce, you have increased business. So there's a whole range of things here where we need to be engaging with people who face the community and can sell, for want of a better word, sell the messages we're trying to sell in terms of this modal shift and in terms of this new transport system we're trying to promote. The second work stream then, as I said, talks about specific project acceptance supports. One of the most effective means we have of promoting behavioral change is delivering good infrastructure. If people have safe cycling infrastructure, safe walking infrastructure, good, reliable, quality public transport infrastructure, they will use it. So the key thing is being able to deliver that. And one of the biggest barriers in delivering good infrastructure is that we get our communications wrong. That we don't explain to people what we're doing, we don't explain why we're doing it, we don't explain what it'll look like, and people get afraid and nervous and object to it. And it's all about bringing people with us, talking to people, making sure they understand what we're doing and why, because otherwise failure to get your stakeholder engagement and communication efforts right do result in a disproportionate risk of public opposition, which can block public delivery. You can have communities put pressure on local elected members who not vote things through. You have legal challenges in the form of judicial reviews. So it's all about bringing communities with you and getting those project communications right. And we're doing a whole suite of work around that in terms of assessing current communications capabilities, identifying what the gaps are and looking at ways of filling those gaps so that we have a more consistent and cohesive way of communicating with communities across the whole country so that we are getting the buy-in for these projects. Looking at a standardized catalogue of projects so that we have off-the-shelf brochures of projects that have been delivered and that have worked that we can give to other communities where projects are proposed and say, this is somewhere else that was like your town or village or city, and this is what we did there, and it's what we think will work here, so that they can see it working in practice. So that whole project acceptance piece is really important. Moving on then to car advertising regulations, we are exploring potential opportunities, be they regulatory or voluntary, to support the overall objectives of public engagement and the communication strategy. So potentially where we embed messages in our car advertising about, for shorter journeys, use active travel or use public transport, so that every time you see a car ad, you're also seeing a message saying, but there are alternatives and you should consider using them where appropriate. And then finally, I won't go into this slide in detail, but finally, there is an evaluation framework and research support. Point B there is probably the one I'd like to touch on in any detail. We have commissioned Red C to do a long-term impact survey. So where we basically survey a sample of maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people every 6 months to see if their attitudes are changing as we roll out things like our public engagement strategies, as we roll out a national ad campaign, and try and track that change in attitudes over time to make sure that the message is landing. So all of this work is being done as part of a whole of government system. The Department of Taoiseach have a climate communications coordination committee that we work with. The Department of Environment, Climate and Communications have a delivery task force that we work with. And then we have an internal steering group that's being set up in the department to work through all of these different objectives to make sure that we're delivering on this overall strategy. So how does this relate to local authorities? Obviously, I think one of the key things on local authorities' minds at the moment is the development of your 5-year climate action plans. My understanding is that they're due to be completed by February of next year. So if I were to try and link this whole communications piece to the work that you're doing in the local authority climate action plans, I think it would be really important. If you look on the right-hand side, this is taken from the local authority climate action plan guidelines. And the fourth row or arrow or bullet or whatever you want to call it there, participative, involving a range of stakeholders to contribute to both the development of the climate action plan and the practical delivery of actions. So this says your climate action plans need to involve your communities. You need to have them input into the development of options, and you need to have them participate in the delivery. And I think we need to consider and plan the role of communications, engagement, and local advocacy in a whole range of transport-related policies, demand management, parking policy, road space reallocation, public realm improvements, active travel, infrastructure and policies, EV charging infrastructure. There's a whole range of transport-related things that we're doing that we need to do. And I think it's really important that not only do we do it, but that we also explain to our communities why we're doing it, why it's important, why it is a good thing to do. And I think the more understanding people have about what we're asking them to do and what we're doing for them, the more buy-in we will get. Linking back to my first slide, getting that buy-in will be absolutely critical. So just a few pointers in terms of how we get this communication right. And I'm acutely aware that Sean is going to be speaking after me, and I feel like I'm going to be examined to see if I've got my language right or wrong here. But we do need to focus on the why, not just the what. So let's take a cycleway, for example. I think it's really important that we don't just say, we're digging up this road to put in a cycleway. Boom. We need to explain the effect it'll have, the benefits it will have. And we need to be transparent about the climate imperative of this. We need to say climate change is an issue. We need to cut our transport emissions by 50% by 2030. And this will help us doing that by taking X number of cars off the road. But point out the wider benefits. We've got so much to sell here: healthier, safer, better, less congested places for people, businesses, and families. So this isn't just about climate. That's one of the core things, but there are lots of other benefits, and we shouldn't be afraid to sell them. But importantly, for every change we ask the public to make in terms of their own behavior, we need to show them what action government is taking to make that change easier. So we'd like you to cycle more. So here we've developed a whole new cycle lane network infrastructure, whatever it may be. We want you to use more public transport, and we've laid on, one new rural Connecting Ireland bus route per week. So it's all about matching that social contract piece of, we want you to do this, and to make it easier, we've done that. And it's about showing people in a realistic and tangible way as possible what the new transport system will look like. Show them examples of where it's been done elsewhere. Show them examples of how it could be if we get it right, be it other places in Ireland, be it places in Holland, wherever it may be. Show them what we are working towards so that people understand it and can buy into it. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, John. That was really, really good. So some really useful insights, I think, there. And I suppose you can really see from kind of earlier on from Alan's point about that communication between the community and local authorities, that really it's communities, local authorities and government. We all interact in that same ecosystem and are, reliant on each other for information in, information out, and actually getting things done. So thanks again. And like that, folks, if you have any questions for John, hang on to them and we'll go through them at the end. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Sean Driver, who is a plain English editor and trainer with the National Adult Literacy Agency, or NALA. And I suppose NALA is an organisation that is very close to my heart, as Sean will know. I've worked alongside the board there for a number of years, and I think it's probably fair to say it's an organisation that really punches above its weight in terms of both at an Irish and at a European level, in terms of supporting adults with literacy or numeracy or digital literacy needs, and definitely punches above its weight in terms of engaging with its community. Learners are the core part of everything they do, from developing strategic plans right down to the day-to-day work that they do. I suppose a huge piece of work that they were involved in over the last number of years was getting the Adult Literacy for Life, the 10-year strategy, which really brought adult literacy out of the realms of purely education, into something that Sean mentioned, or that John mentioned there, that whole of government, whole of society approach that we're looking at in terms of sustainability, that literacy would also exist. It doesn't just exist in the classroom. And I suppose, for your staff, or local authorities and staff on the ground, I mean, your guys are coming across people, are supporting people, are solving problems for people who need extra support every day, whether that's the parking attendants on the ground, whether that's frontline staff. And I suppose in the context of this webinar, over the next number of years, we're going to be asking people to do things like downloading an app so they can do bike sharing, pay for things online, read new signs, try to understand why the new signs are there, why the new bylaws are there, why the new rules are there. I used to park there, I can't park there any longer. And I suppose really the big thing that Sean's going to be talking about is the fact that if we communicate in plain English, we're communicating to all. So look, Sean, I'm going to hand over to you now, and I'm looking forward to this. It'll be a really practical way of translating some of those things that John has talked about, for you guys into, right, if we need to operationalize this plan, what are we going to do? So
Perfect.
Yeah, thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, John. I'm just going to share my screen, folks. It's very interesting to follow Mary and follow John there. Hi, billing. But here we go. Am I sharing my screen, folks? Yeah.
Yeah, it's not in presenter mode yet, Sean.
Yeah, I'll do that now. Here we go. Perfect.
That-
So,
yeah.
yeah, all good? Perfect. Yeah, so folks, what I want to talk about today is how plain English can help you in your work. And, the work that John has outlined there, like, just so important, listening to that and the work that you're going to be involved in, just essential things. So I hope this webinar helps you. I'm just going to go through, like, what is plain English, what are some tips to help you when you're communicating with people. Going to go through some resources and going to, try to make it interactive to get you thinking. And we'll have some questions and answers at the end. So I really like interactive, folks. So what I want you to do is in the chat box, I want you to imagine that you're communicating with someone through an email or through one of your, your strategies and plans to implement, behavior change, so heavy thing. But what are the two essential things for you when you're communicating with people for clear communication? So I want everyone in the chat box, just what are your two key things for clear communication? Everybody in the chat box, just put your two things there. I'll give you 30 seconds. Do that for me, please. In the chat box, what are your two key things to communicate clearly? Yeah, keep it going, folks. I'll give you another couple of seconds, then we'll talk about it. So what are your two key things? Let's have a quick look through them and talk through them. So having, short sentences, making it to the point, making it clear, making it concise, making sure there's different mediums like website and radio, avoiding fancy English, using icons and images to help people. Yeah, to be understood and encourage feedback. Very true. And that, I think that's a key point, Selena, understanding who we are communicating with and trying to tailor the message to fit that audience. I mean, that's what it's all about. I love when people say that, because when we're communicating with people, we have to think about who are we talking to and how can we communicate the message for them. Great. So that's it, folks. So in one sentence and a couple of bullet points, we talk about plain English being a way to write and present information so your reader can understand and act on it after a single reading. Just think about that for a minute, folks. Whether it's a sign in a parking garage, whether it's a web page, or whether it's a report, you want things to be so clear that the person can understand the information, find what they need, and then be able to use it in their lives. Because the information you're giving people is not background information, so they can make important life decisions, and so behavior can change. Plain English means writing accurately and clearly for the intended reader. So the intended reader is a key concept, folks. When we talk about the intended reader, if you want to aim for a general audience, you want to aim for a curious teenager. Aim for a curious teenager who's doing their junior cert, maybe like 13, 14, 15-year-old, maybe going to their first Lana Del Rey concert, someone who is like very keen to learn new things, but also needs to have things explained to them, so it's that curious teenager. If you're writing for a very informed audience, you want to think about how, you're going to use technical words. You're going to use jargon for a very informed audience because they're very helpful to shorten difficult concepts. But when we're explaining those difficult concepts to members of the public, maybe we have to explain them or use different words. So who is your intended reader? General audience, aim for a curious teenager, kind of junior cert level. Next point, avoid jargon so people understand it. And then what's also key, folks, is layout and design. So when we're looking at a sign or a web page or a report, how it's structured, how it's presented to us will decide whether or not we want to read it. There's some myths about plain English. I don't want to spend too much time on these, but you want to bust these, that when you talk about writing in plain English, people will accuse you of these things. People will say, oh, it's just dumbing down the message. It's not dumbing down the message. It's helping more people access information. It's not patronizing your reader. It's recognizing, folks, that, like, this is a big threat against our way of living, and we have to, change our behavior in order to, thrive as a people. So you're not patronizing people. You're just making things as easy as possible for them to act upon the information. You're not changing the information. You're not changing the meaning of things. You're just kind of making it simpler and easier and helping people, make important decisions. And it's not only using short words and sentences. People often say, oh, plain English is just short words and short sentences. Well, it's more to it than that, which we're going to look at some examples. And why is it so important, folks? Well, I'm going to talk about the literacy issue in Ireland just for, a minute. So these stats are taken from the OECD, which is a big European-wide, economic and social development organization that does lots of research. And they get about 6,000 to 7,000 people every 10 years, and they test their literacy, numeracy, and technology skills across different European countries so we can, see what people's adults' skills are. So what I want you to do, folks, is in the chat box, I want you to give me a number for one and how many adults might be at or below level 1 literacy. Well, what's level 1? Well, level 3, folks, is your junior cert. When you pass your junior cert, you're considered to be functionally literate. You're at level 3. You know, level 5, level 6 are your degrees. Level 7 and 8 are your degrees. Level 9 is your master's. Level 10 is your PhD. So level 3 functional. Level 1 very, low level literacy. So just in the chat box, folks, one and how many people might be at or below level 1 literacy in Ireland? Just put a number in the chat box if you don't mind. Always good to get a range. Yeah. Thanks, folks. So the stat presented in different ways, it's 1 in 6 people, or 18% of the population, or 500,000. So just think about that, folks. 500,000 people in Ireland at a very, very, very basic level of literacy. And then numeracy, it's also very important considering who you're trying to target and what you're trying to target them with. 1 in 4 adults are at level 1 in numeracy. And then for technology, as the government, has a rush to online services and local authorities have rushes to online services, 2 in 5 adults, 42% are at level 1 in technology. So those stats are a little bit old, stuff from 10 years ago. This is part of a survey that will be done, that's ongoing again. So we'll have new results in 2024. We've had the pandemic, maybe people's and technology skills have improved, but that's the kind of stats, and that's what we're kind of, that's a skills issue in Ireland. So, Mary mentioned the strategy, the Isle Literacy for Life strategy, which is helping to target this issue. But that's just the background, folks, in which we're kind of working in as well. So if you look at NALA's just role really quickly, it's to help people improve their basic skills with our free phone service, with learning online, and then it's also about helping organizations to, write in plain language so everyone can understand. So just these are some of the organizations who work with us, so the Bank of Ireland, National Transport Authority, Central Statistics Office, EirGrid, the Court Service, all trying to promote, public services in plain language. And that's what we do as well. So in the 2020 program for government, there's a plain language requirement and all public service communication, so people can understand information the first time they hear it. This saves time and money and reduces mistakes and complaints. So that's the government's commitments, that they're going to introduce this plain language requirements. So that's in the program for government. So that's just a little background, folks. Just have a look at the time. Okay, in 10 minutes. So what I want to do is I want to make this very interactive and helpful for you. So in a longer workshop, we'd go through our checklist in more detail. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through our 5 points, and I'm going to use examples to illustrate them. So when you're communicating with people, folks, these are the top 5 tips. You want to imagine your readers and speak directly to them, So just who are we writing to? How can I imagine what their needs are? I want you to think about the inverted pyramid writing. Sounds complicated, but it's not. It's just think like a journalist. What's the top line message? How can I hook people? How can I get to the point straight away? Don't bury the message at the very bottom. Then white space headings and bullets. Again, presentation and layout is a key to help people grasp information. Then the language we use. Can we use everyday words, the words of our readers? Can we cut unnecessary jargon? And can we explain key technical words? And then can we keep sentences short? So there's the 5 points, folks, I want you to walk away with today. Okay, so that's the inverted pyramid writing. Basically, it's think like a journalist. What's the key message? How can I explain it in the first paragraph? And then the rest is additional information. Okay, so I'm going to talk through an example just to illustrate it. And one of the examples, I'm going to skip right to the example just to keep us going. Okay, so this is from the NTA, folks, the National Transport Authority. And we did a kind of training and editing project with them a year ago. And this was about vehicle clamping regulation. And what I challenged them to think about was just why would anyone ever be searching the internet for vehicle clamping regulation? They'd only be doing it in the cases where they were actually clamping and they wanted to make an appeal. So what this webpage, the way it was structured, I want you to answer this question, folks. If you look at that web page there, I know if you just scan through it, like you'll see that it's leading the legislation, has clamping appeals, and then has language like this, which we're going to analyze. Okay. So this is just an extract from it. The clamping appeals. The current legislation permits the person in charge of the vehicle, motorist, at the time it was clamped or relocated, to appeal the clamp release fee. A 2-stage appeal process has been established for this purpose. What I challenged them to do was to think more of like providing a service in terms of providing like user-centered experience. So if you were typing in the chat box, folks, the first 3 lines, or the first 3 words, I should say, of how we would restructure this in plain language, would anyone have any suggestions? You know, if you were to boil that sentence down to, or the 2 sentences down to, like, what we want people to do, think about it for a minute. And in the chat box, if you fancy, how could we rewrite this just to get to the essential point of what we want people to do? I'll give you a minute. Thank you, Therese. Exactly, Therese. That's it. You know, and I'd love to ask you to speak, Therese, but if you wanted to, like, what's the power of writing like that? You know, Therese in the chat box says you can appeal the clamp fee. You know, the power of that is you're giving people agency. You're giving people power to do something. You're not hitting them over the head with the current legislation permits the person in charge of the vehicle, the motorist. You're saying you, giving people power. And that's so effective. That's so effective. Thank you, Therese. Yeah, that's another great structure, Owen, as well. Like, if you begin with if sentences, they're very empathetic. If you want to do this, you can do this. That's another great structure to do. So what I kind of got them to, that's exactly what I got them to think about, folks, was that, like, how to make a clamping appeal. Use if sentences, get inside your readers' heads if you're in this situation. So if your vehicle was clamped or relocated, you can appeal and seek to be refunded the release fee. Therese wrote it much better than I did, but that's, you know, there are 2 stages of the appeal. So just 2-stage process has been established for this purpose. In the nicest way possible, no one cares that this has been established. You know, what are they? There are 2 stages. First one, appeal to the parking controller. Second one, appeal to the NTA. And then you must appeal first the parking controller before you appeal to the NTA. So, like, in this session, folks, what I want you, the key point is just think about what your users' needs are. How can I write to them directly instead of kind of having legislation and background information? Just get to the key point. Okay. Perfect. I want to show you just a couple more examples, folks. I always over prepare, so we have 5 minutes. I want to show you more examples. This is about the inverted pyramid of writing. It's about what's the key message for your reader, similar to what we just did there. And this is from an insurance agency, folks. So I want you to imagine that you've been in a bit of a fender bender and that you have to write a letter to an insurance agency and you want them to pay you because it's not your fault. You want them to pay you for your damage to your car. It's not your fault. And you get back this letter from the insurance agency. Okay. And I want you to tell me, you open this up on a busy day, what's the key sentence for you as the person who's looking for the insurance agency to pay them back? Have a quick read through that. What's the key sentence for you? You can type in the chat box or shout it out. So you've been in a bit of a fender bender. You've asked another person's insurance agent to pay you. What's the key sentence? Yeah, that's it, Theo. We stand over initial review. Both parties bear their own costs for the claim. Exactly. So this is the key point I always say to organizations is, if possible, and in something like this, it's difficult because it is a kind of a no letter, but it's, how can we put the key message first? So I think we can do that by just recognizing that if we just thank you for your recent correspondence, we've taken your points into consideration, and we explain these 3 things: our decision, our rationale, what you do if you disagree, and just use some subheadings, use white space. We've given your letter full consideration. However, we stand over initial claim. Each party bears their own costs for the claim. It's both responsible. Please allow us to explain why. There's the rationale, what you can do if you disagree. So when you think about plain language, folks, it's not just the words we choose to use. It's more about how we structure them, how we put the user's needs first. Yeah, so that's just an example from an insurance agency. And if I do one more example, folks, just to get you thinking. I'll do this one because I think this one is good to illustrate. So, and then we'll do this and then we'll wrap it up. So we did a bit of work with Jacobs Engineering. You may have heard of them. And they were commissioned to do a transport and mobility option study about the Phoenix Park. And Phoenix Park, very close to a lot of people's hearts. You know, a lot of people wanting to make sure that everyone gets fair use of it. And they wrote this really good report, which I'd recommend. And they have an executive summary. Okay, and you'll see here they're using kind of what I love about this is that they're using these kind of headings to kind of introduce information. So consultation participation, walking and cycling improvements, public transport proposal, access gates and roads proposal, which I think is a good technique that they're using to kind of what I think front load information. But then when they got down to a part which is here, okay, they got down to this part here, which is the introduction. And they talked about the study assessed several options and recommended preferred option. This preferred option makes several key recommendations, including the following. Okay, and you have these kind of short paragraphs. But what I recommend doing, folks, is always be thinking about how you can front load things. Always thinking about, like, for want of a better word, people can be quite lazy readers, you know, and if you give them short pieces and chunks of information to take in, it'll help them see the distinct things you're talking about. So like if you were to write a short little heading at the start of the first one, say 2 words or 3 words, that was very active, what would the first one be? Let's just do it in the chat box, folks. Let's have a read of the first paragraph there. And then in 3 words, everyday language, what would the first little heading there be? Yeah. And the other ones, folks, from the first one? Yeah, that's it, folks. So you're getting the key point there for walkers, improve footpaths. Excellent. You're on a roll now. Let's do the second one. Do the second one for me, folks. I know I'm being very, very quick, but do the second one for me. Have a quick read of the last paragraph there. Now, if you were to break that down into 2 or 3 words for the second one there, what could you do? Yeah. Different ways of doing it. That's good. Yeah. You know the 5 seconds for the second one? Great. So yeah, thank you so much, John. So again, it goes back to the point about like using everyday language, front loading information. If you were to start those kind of those 4 key points, those 4 recommendations, put pedestrians first, upgrade cycle paths, reduce traffic, introduce bus links. You know, you can change them. Maybe you don't like the whole kind of Trump-esque sound of the first one, which I probably edit now, put pedestrians first. But you know, pedestrians, upgrade cycle paths, reduce traffic, introduce bus links. What you're doing by that, folks, is you're scaffolding different sorts of literacy. You're making it easier for everyone. You're also making it so that people who, you know, maybe part of the 1 in 6 or people with like lower literacy levels, you know, can, you know, understand the information, and it's just quicker for everyone. So folks, that's just a couple of the guidelines. I could go through more, but I'm just conscious of the time. So I'm going to leave it there. You see, I always do over prepare. But if I were to just go through the 5 points again, hopefully we've kind of covered them a little bit. Who are our readers? Can we speak directly to them? How can we put the key message first? How does white space, headings, and bullets help us with text? Can we use everyday words, you know? And can we keep sentences short? So to achieve that, folks, oh yeah, and I thought this was really interesting. But just because I saw in the news, it was like 61% of people on a Newstalk survey would give up their car for reliable and frequent public transport. Just thought that was really interesting. Anyway, what else am I going to say? Yeah, if there's one thing I really encourage you to do, folks, is when you're developing materials, or whether it's signs or whether it's policies, it's to work together as a team with the people in your local authority and review what's working and what's not working. And we call that, in kind of plain English and content design, crit sessions. So where people work together to review, okay, we have this new policy, or we have this new communications campaign. How can we, you know, put the needs of our readers first, and just ask people for feedback. internally, and if you have time to do user testing as well. So it can be quite time consuming and quite a brave thing to do, but it goes to that point what John said, like bring everyone along. It's getting everyone involved in the process. And a way you can do that is just getting people looking at materials in-house. Yeah. So very quickly, folks, I just want you to reflect, okay? I just want you to reflect. If there's one thing you learned, it could be from John's presentation or my presentation. What's one thing you learned in terms of how you can adopt plain English in your work? Okay, how can plain English help you in your work? Give you a minute and just put your answers in the chat box. What's one way you can adopt plain English in your work? Give you a minute or two to think about it. Put your answer in the chat box. Thanks, folks. Yeah, keep going. Give you another minute or two. Yeah, so we have, think of the end user. Yeah, keep them centered in your mind. Less is more. Front load the messages. Simplify emails. A lot of our work gets done in emails, folks. Think of your recipients, reviewing what's working, what's not working. Avoid technical jargon. Perfect. So there's lots more things. If you're interested in what we've talked about today, folks, you can join NANLA as a member. Please do consider that. So it shows you support literacy. If you're interested in plain language, you can, on LinkedIn, we have a plain English network. We have 300 members. We just share resources. We just plan talks, similar to talks like this. I'm delighted to be along. So similar to this, please do think about joining on LinkedIn, NANLA Plain English Network. Anything else? If you want training, folks, we have open training sessions. We do training sessions like this where we tailor them for organizations. Please do get involved. We have an open one in September, and you can also get in touch with me directly for tailored ones. But that's it. I've probably gone over my time. Sorry about that. Just thank you for your time, folks. And sure, we have questions and answers now. So I'm going to hand back to Alan or Mary. Lovely.
Great. Thanks very much, Sean. And that was really, well, it introduced me to a lot of new things, I have to say. Just in terms of wrapping up, I'm conscious of time. I wanted to quickly show one slide, and I suppose that's a key thing that we've spoken about in this webinar series, is about, parking and mobility really, as you see at the center there, can be a key enabler of change. It can also be a roadblock to change. So I hope that, information like you've heard today will help it be exactly that, an enabler rather than a roadblock. So that you have, the agility, flexibility, and all that other good stuff as well in terms of planning what you're going to do for the future. So